Impeachment and gaming tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
You know, we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out who ought to operate our gaming situation here in the state. We talked a lot about it last night with Ted Nesi on the Target 12 scene, but one of the things that is becoming abundantly clear is that the market's shrinking, or the competition is increasing, or a combination of both, and we go to expertise on that again this evening, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, it's very hard for us to keep up to date with this program on the impeachment dynamic at this point, because we record our programs each and every afternoon at 1:30, right? But at press time, we've got an accumulation of what's happened since yesterday. And as I told you yesterday, I really thought that maybe Nancy Pelosi would hold off on her declaration of formal impeachment inquiry, given that the president had, in the midday, said that he would release a memo on his conversation with President Zelensky of Ukraine. This checkers match going on back and forth, some would say chess, it's more like checkers, going back and forth between the president and the speaker at this point is fascinating. One could say that if she didn't do what she did last night, we wouldn't be getting, or the momentum too, we wouldn't be getting the president to off up on some things. But remember, on Thursday, tomorrow, the DNI and the IG are scheduled to speak to Congress, and I think there's got to be a lot laid out there. And where the whistleblower lays in here, getting less attention, by the way, is that the Senate voted 100-0 to resolve that the DNI cough up the whistleblower's complaint to the proper authorities, meaning congressional authorities, for private view. So this is a very fluid situation. Headlines like this are running all over the place. Of course, the Democrats say this is, a bolster of impeachment case, and others would claim differently. The president thinks by putting this thing out, he more or less has exonerated himself, which of course is hardly the case. Here's what we had from the network at press time.
President Trump continued to defend his call with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky after releasing a partial transcript. During the call, President Trump says there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Zelensky said he would look into it and asked for more information, to which the president responded, "I will have Mr. Giuliani give you a call, and I am also going to have Attorney General Barr call, and we will get to the bottom of it."
There was no pressure. The way you had that built up, that call, it was going to be the call from hell. It turned out to be a nothing call.
President Trump insists he did not put a hold on millions in military aid in an attempt to pressure Ukraine to conduct the investigation into former Vice President Biden. Democrats believe they can establish wrongdoing even though there is no quid pro quo on the call.
There doesn't need to be a quid pro quo to be a crime. Just the fact that he did all those things is sufficient.
CBS News has learned the White House is also working with intelligence officials to release a redacted version of the whistleblower complaint, which was filed after the president's call.
Democrats say their investigation needs to go beyond the transcript and the whistleblower complaint.
There may have been many interactions by the president or people like Rudy Giuliani to apply this pressure campaign, even as the president of the United States withheld vital military aid to an ally that's at war with Russia.
But Republicans say the Democrats are trying to drive the president out of office.
Unfortunately, we've seen this drumbeat towards impeachment from our conference since the day Donald Trump got elected.
The Judiciary Committee will eventually decide whether to bring impeachment charges against the president, which will then be voted on by the full House.
There's been no drumbeat since the president got elected. There's been a drumbeat since the president found himself in hot water. The spin on both sides sometimes is incredible here. This is a very fluid situation, but I will tell you that the President of the United States thinks he's okay. Because the President of the United States doesn't understand the law or the Constitution, has never cared about that. And The first sign that he's actually worried about this whole thing was reported yesterday when he called the House Speaker and said, can we make a deal? Like he just wants to make a deal out of this. They're not going to make a deal out of this. This investigation is going to be thorough. Rudy Giuliani's in the middle of this mix. This transcript is clearly evidence of a conversation in the middle. The references to Joe Biden and Giuliani are kind of ongoing as opposed to brand new for President Zelensky. And you ought to read the transcript. The one thing you will find is that Zelensky is a complete sycophant to the President of the United States. And why is that, right? Why is that? All right, more on this tomorrow with some expertise as this case moves along. In the meantime, just wanted to mention this on this thing called vaping. A long time ago, we did a show on this as an alternative to smoking. And, you know, I was very, very gun shy on the conversation. It was like this, oh, this is a great thing. This is, you know, relief to the nicotine habits of smokers. It's a whole lot safer. Well, the kids have gotten a hold of it, right? And there are too many cases all across this country that are worrisome. The governor of Massachusetts has issued a 4-month ban and kind of an emergency call on this. And Governor Raimondo is scheduled to do something maybe today, maybe already did, maybe tomorrow, on an executive order basis. I just raised this question. You know, given all that we kind of know historically about smoking and all that kind of thing, does anybody look at the vaping thing, somebody who's vaping, and say, that's got to be dangerous? I mean, do you just look at it and say, probably not good? I don't know. I thought so from the beginning. We'll see how that whole thing rolls out. All right, look at this headline on gaming. I'm going to talk IGT, but this is really at the core. And this, I think this question has been missed. The Boston Globe's piece on the fertile market, not so much, is something that ought to be read. Encore is in, MGM is in and operating. And long, we've talked to Patrick Kelly, our esteemed professor from PC, about the market. And now we're starting to see some of what you projected bear some fruit. Welcome, good to see you.
Good to see you.
There's just one big pie.
Right.
The pie does, well, let me ask you this. The old adage was if you put a Burger King and a McDonald's next to each other, it wouldn't split the burger market, it would double the amount of burgers.
Right.
We're not seeing that here.
We're not seeing that here.
So just because there are more casinos doesn't mean the appetite for spending gambling money has increased.
Not necessarily. And so what you have here is it's states against states, right back to their trying to raise revenue, et cetera. Massachusetts decided to get into the game. Encore is a big piece of the game for Massachusetts. And so where that will have a ripple effect. MGM starting has had a ripple effect. You're looking at, for the last 14 months, Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods have seen decreases in their slot revenue. Within a month of Encore opening, you've got Twin River laying off people from its table games. And so while and many of the casinos will tell you their strategy is to attract convenience gamblers, people who are going to go repeatedly, not live too far away. About half of the people who go to Twin River are from Massachusetts. So when you start Encore, and they're at least initially going to go there to, all right, I'm curious, let me see what the place is all about. And I haven't, full disclosure, I haven't been to Encore yet. I'll get up there one of these days.
I looked at the video, but it's supposed to be pretty hip.
But it's, they've identified that as a destination resort casino for people who are going to go to Boston. Hey, I've never been to a casino. I hear this casino's over here at $1.6 billion. Let me go take a look. And that's what you're seeing now with a lot of the Massachusetts residents. Where that could come haunt Rhode Island is not as many people from Massachusetts coming to Twin River or Tiverton.
Well, all due respect to the gaming world and to your expertise, duh.
Yeah. It wasn't a big reach to predict this years ago that this was going to happen. Because when you look at the number of Massachusetts residents who were going to Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods, et cetera, it's not surprising that this is happening. And we're not done yet. All right, we're not done yet. Potentially, you could end up with a casino in the eastern part of Massachusetts. You got Plainridge Park. You could end up with another casino, maybe in Taunton. Who knows? You could end up with another casino north of Hartford, potentially. You could end up with another casino maybe in Bridgeport. All of that is going to have an impact.
Yeah, north of Hartford would be tough. I mean, you know, MGM is
Yeah.
in Springfield is kind of a stop area for that.
But
Clearly,
again,
it's hurt Mohegan and Foxwoods, no doubt about
it's
that.
states against states. That's where, now MGM will pull out all the stops to sue, to do whatever they can to prevent, but don't be surprised if in 10 years you have some sort of gambling facility in the Hartford area or north of Hartford to
Well,
to
Bradley
compete.
Teletheater is right there, and it runs the horses.
So we'll see how it.
All right. Well, we'll talk more about how the market reacts to this, and of course the IGT Twin River controversy is right in the middle of it. Stay with us. So while the market is in flux and the competition increases for gaming, we have this controversy, as we outlined yesterday, and of course we've had much commentary on this. We had the chairman of IGT in here just a few weeks ago. By the way, on both platforms, on Dan York's State of Mind and on the radio show, weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRO, we are still waiting for executives from Twin River to come here and state their case. I'm not exactly sure why, other than what seemingly is the pure incompetence of their marketing agent, who continues to string this show out. I don't know why. The Twin River management and I thought, got along just fine. So it must be that the questions that I have are, frankly, I don't know why. Sometimes incompetence is hard to explain. But in the midst of the battle and the marketing and the lobby money that's been spent by IGT and Twin River in their fight for turf, the governor explained her position to renew IGT yesterday at the State House.
On the efficiency rating.
The House Finance Committee has questions about the state's proposed $1 billion contract extension for IGT.
Is that in the contract?
While Twin River runs the 2 Rhode Island casinos, IGT is behind most of the technology, like slot machines and scratch tickets. Governor Gina Raimondo testified in front of the committee Tuesday.
Competitive?
She fully supports the proposal to extend the state's current 20-year contract with IGT.
And with the scratch tickets, they're giving us the same price that they gave us 20 years ago.
The proposal, though, has been criticized by Twin River, which wants a cut of the profits and a shot at being considered for the contract. But the governor told the committee typically gaming deals like this go through the State House directly rather than a bidding process.
There's 3 companies in the country that do this business. Only one of them is a Rhode Island company, and I say keep the work local whenever we can.
Lawmakers also raised questions about if and how this contract would impact the state's program to help problem gamers.
What happens if Twin River decides that since they did not have the contract go in their favor, that they're no longer going to take the responsibility for the lion's share of the services?
The head of the lottery says because of existing laws, nothing would change.
Anybody who calls up for help on the hotline will receive that help. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, sir.
What? What? How closely have you been following this controversy?
From afar, just my sense is, let the General Assembly do its due diligence and figure that this is. I teach cost accounting at Providence College. This is a big cost accounting problem. Figure it out. Figure it out. But when you're talking about 1,100 jobs and a headquarters in Providence, if they leave, who's going in that building?
Oh, well, Twin River says that their new partner will fill those jobs.
Okay.
But their new partner also doesn't provide any manufacturing of these products. In fact, they often sub out to IGT to provide them. So I find this to be one of the. It's not a mystery, but the idea of no bid, it makes people. It's a saleable worry item for the general public who feels like they're always getting it in the shorts, always getting cheated, always, the fix is in, always the bada bing, that kind of thing. When in fact, Twin River on 2 occasions has been renewed in their own contract without a bid, right? It's interesting though, the pressure that Twin River is feeling to add revenue is not just natural hunger. seems to me, it is this pressure
Right.
going back to your original analysis. And by the way, I don't think Twin River's a bad actor. I think they're just trying to survive and grow for their own investors the business. That they haven't showed up here is more about the incompetence of their public relations agent than it is their business model or their plan. But I think this legislature will, to your point, need to do the responsible thing and not give this IGT deal a pass just because they've already had one. There's 3.5 years left. There's some time to be able to say, let's really dig into this whole thing and pull it apart. And if it is not making sense on a cost accounting basis,
then
skinny it.
Right.
Right?
Right. You've got time.
Yeah.
This is not running out at the end of the month here, or even at the end of the year.
Right.
You've got time.
But the market pressure is obviously significant on all of these companies right now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's not going to get any better.
No. It's going to get... Now, it's with states competing against states, whatever advantage they can get to, they will try to capitalize on, like now with Rhode Island with sports betting, all right? They will, you know, to the extent that they can have a competitive advantage, they're first to market, to the extent that they can have mobile sports betting and attract people from Massachusetts and Connecticut, they'll try to do that. The challenge that you have there is if sports betting is tremendously successful in Rhode Island, how Massachusetts is right next in line. They'll do it, and as will Connecticut. And so at the end of the day, you're going to be basically looking at your own citizens participating in sports betting, casino gambling, et cetera, which is a problem, and that's where the problem gambling piece comes in.
Well, to be honest with you, I think we'll talk, when we come back, we'll talk about the sports betting part, because I think right now it really is your own citizens. So I'll explain why I think that's the case already. Stay with us. Yeah, so again, Twin River, doing some layoffs, and there could be a return of business flow to Twin River when the excitement of Encore wears out a little bit. Clearly, Twin River is more of a convenience gaming operation. Encore is a destination.
That's their strategy.
And that creates a difference.
Yes.
Yeah. But the sports betting thing is kind of interesting. By the way, I have no philosophical problem with it. I've made a couple of sports bets at Twin River. I was up there the other day, as a matter of fact, the lonely Giant fan looking at the monitor, saying bad words until last week when Dan Jones got back in the game. So I think we're in good shape here, if we have a defense. But the amount of cash, Professor, that some of these folks actually reportedly invest as they're chatting is mind-blowing to me. I sat there as one guy was talking to another about how he had $15,000 on each of the games and he was playing. That's a lot of dough, man. That's a lot of dough. I don't think it represents nearly the average pedestrian gambler, but that guy is probably not going to do a sports betting thing. My thinking is that guy doesn't need to be identified or tracked by something that can watch what he's doing. The guy who can throw $15,000, $20,000 in cash around on a game,
right,
most likely wants to operate on a stealth basis. Make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah, right? So, and the sports betting app now on the phone is restrictive to having to stay in Rhode Island to do it. So your projection that sports betting per state will probably be an in-state thing is most likely on track.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now,
which means the numbers are not going to be incredibly significant and probably less than originally projected.
Yes, I think so. Having mobile sports betting will help in terms of revenue. I mean, that's what New Jersey's found.
And why not,
that
right?
About
Except unless you're a constitutional scholar and you think that we probably should have voted on this. And I think that probably is the case.
There's a case to be made for that.
Yeah. Well, guess what? That case is moving in the courts.
Yep.
So
and we'll see what the outcome is of that.
Yeah, that's another story that we've chronicled here. But you're also talking about some of the problem gaming stuff, and that's part of what you study. You worried about this phone thing?
I'm very worried about the phone for two reasons. Number one, for sports betting on mobile devices in Rhode Island, you only have to be 18. That's a problem. A lot of other states is 21. I've worked with 18-year-olds for the last 30 years. Don't go there. don't give them an ability to sports bet on their phone.
Well, they can serve in the military.
They can, but almost every other state that has sports betting is 21. Number two, the executive director of the National Council on Problem Gambling has predicted 10,000 new problem gamblers in Rhode Island by putting sports betting on mobile devices. That's a significant increase, and that's something, even if it's half that, 5,000 people that are going to be in the problem gambling area because of sports betting on the phone, that's a problem. And given that, given that prediction, and it's probably let's say it's in the ballpark, we really need to get busy and say, okay, in terms of prevention, what can we do to prevent this? And Rhode Island's getting enough money, the states for sports betting are getting enough money to make that investment in prevention programs.
So what are we investing in? What do we need to invest?
I think you need to invest in prevention programs, education programs.
But is there a tangible amount that you think is necessary? There's a formula you told me last time.
National Council on Problem Gambling recommends 1% of the revenue.
And Rhode Island so far has spent what?
Less than 0.1%. It's about last I checked, it was about 250,000, so it's less than 0.1%. And that's not uncommon across the country. Some states don't spend anything. But I think now that it's really rolling out, and particularly with the 18 to 21-year-old age group, I think you better be really investing in prevention programs. And my hope is that Rhode Island doesn't, that 5 years ago everybody says, well, Dr. Kelly's wrong in that we didn't have any increase in problem gambling. Make the investment in prevention and hopefully don't have any. But otherwise, that's going to.
These prevention programs work?
Yeah. I mean, and here's the tricky part about prevention programs. You don't know, like, in terms of somebody not becoming a problem gambler, all right? The ill effects, et cetera, it's difficult to track that. I'll be the first to admit it's very difficult to track that. What I can tell you is I've been tracking far too many cases with tragic consequences of people who do become problem gamblers. And the easier you make it with respect to sports betting, the easier it's going to be for people to become problem gamblers. And that's a problem because the state is benefiting from the revenue. Yeah. They need to make the investment.
Well, that makes common sense. I mean, the more accessible it is and the less aggravation you got to go through to make a bet.
Right.
Duh. Right. And it's another seemingly duh factor. Well, your expertise is important, and it's hardly a duh, but thank you very much. We'll continue the conversation with the professor. He always weighs in from time to time. Remember, it is a single market out there, and the divvy continues. Final word when we come back. Stay with us. By the way, a reminder to the Twin River management, seats warm. Seats warm here. It's cozy here in the studio. We'd love to have a conversation with you about what your end game is. In the meantime, tomorrow we'll spend a little bit more time trying to break out the constitutional and criminal issues, if there are any, with the impeachment process. It's a rapidly moving story this week, no doubt. You have a great evening. See you on the radio tomorrow at 3 until 6 on WPRO. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.